Hello, I'm Sinta Ebersohn from Fair Divorce, and today I have with me Michelle Sarrow. She is a professional organizer, and we're going to talk about the chaos that evolves around separation and divorce, and how we can make sense of that and create some order. And Michelle is here to give us some good hands-on practical advice and tips, because that is what she does. Michelle, thank you very much for being here and welcome.
Thank you so much, Sinta, for inviting me to speak with you today.
Please tell us, what is a professional organizer and what do you do specifically for families that are going through separation and divorce?
Sure. So a professional organizer in general is somebody who works, you could work with businesses, you could work in homes, and organizers go in and do a bunch of different things, but mostly helping people to go through what they can't get rid of, edit down their things, and then organize and come up with systems that work for them to maintain and to house the things that they're left over with. And I like to add in there, come up with a maintenance plan going forward. So organizers help with, and every situation is unique, and organizers help with all kinds of things, papers. There are organizers who work digitally as well now. When your computer is overflowing, there are organizers who work specifically with photographs, all kinds of specialties. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think I need one of those. So how is it that you've come to start Divorce RX and do your work mainly with people who are in this situation?
Right. So I have a background in education, and I decided that I was actually not going to pursue that anymore. It was not a big passion for me at a certain point. And my first organizing client was actually the mom of someone in the last class that I taught. And she was explaining to me how she was just buried in papers, and she happens to be a journalist, and she just had this home office and she just could not think straight in it, and she really needed help. And she was just sort of venting and sharing with me, and I just said to her, you know what, I'm pretty organized and I can help you with that. And she said, oh, that would be great. And I went over and helped her do it. And in just a few hours, we had gone through, I had helped her to really think about and go through all of the things that she had and realize how much of it she really didn't need. And then help her organize what was left and put it in different drawers and in filing systems and in closets. And I just saw how grateful she was for the space and for having the help. And I just looked at it and said, you know what, this was sort of second nature and easy for me. And I was pretty good at this. And, maybe I want to do this, as a next step in my career. So I did have an organizing business for about 15 years or so while my kids were little and I was raising them. And I had not so much flexibility to work whenever, but that worked for me. So I could fill in the projects whenever I had time. And that was really, beneficial for me and for my kids at that time. And my husband at the time had a challenging schedule as well. So I really enjoyed it, and I really loved it. And I saw that you could really help people in a short amount of time to really get a grip on something that they had been struggling with and tried. I oftentimes heard people say, I've been trying for years to clean out this closet, to clean out this room. And I start it and I get frustrated and then I just stop. So so then you asked me, how did I get into this specifically? So with the divorce organizing, I myself was divorced about 6 years ago now. And at that time, I cut back my work even further, and also had some things, in my family with my parents, and some illness, unfortunately, and even less flexibility. So about 2 years ago now, when I came back into figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, I actually went back and taught for a little while and decided, no, absolutely, I still do not like that. And I said, I really love the organizing, but, I've been through this experience of divorce where my ex-husband moved out of the family home and set up his own home. And, he took some things with him. And then I also looked at the situation of my kids who we have 50-50 custody with, and the logistics of them going back and forth, and said, I really see people, friends, boyfriends of friends struggling with this. And I said, I bet that there is a way that I can help through organization, people going through divorce at a time when they really are, even if they were organized before divorce, putting on the stresses and the emotional chaos and of the divorce, and oftentimes when there's children involved it's more complicated. They just didn't have the mental bandwidth to organize them, their kids, and I saw a space where I could up, and here are the things that you're going to need to be organized with, both in your home, with your kids, with your scheduling, with your your ex and your co-parent now. So that's kind of how Divorce RX was born, so to speak. Yeah.
Great. And I know from my own experience, because I lived in a home for more than 10 years by the time I got divorced. So there was so much stuff accumulated. And my ex-husband, was also the person who moved out and took what he wanted and left everything that he didn't want behind. So there was a whole lot of stuff to go through that had accumulated in all places, in rooms and places that we hardly ever went to, and in the storerooms and everything, and a whole lot of stuff that he didn't want anymore, that had to be sorted out. So it was a humongous task to do all of that. And like you said, added all the stress and the emotion of the divorce and all the new things that you're busy with, the financials and the legal stuff and the negotiation process and the adjustments of the children and everything. That's like, it seems like a mountain ahead of you. And I think more often than not, the last thing you get around to, I find often people put that off because it's almost as if you don't know where to start.
Exactly. That's a huge thing. And that's not even just typical with divorce. People don't know where to start because it's just so overwhelming. I always like to compare it to losing when you have a lot of weight that you need to lose and it feels just so overwhelming. And the idea that you just have to start somewhere and just take a small step. It's that sometimes people don't buy into. I think in our society, we are used to that immediate gratification. I want it done yesterday. I want it done, now, and I want it to be perfect. And so, I try to speak to people as far as what the project is going to look like and their realistic expectations of how it's going to move forward. And another thing that speaks to what you're saying about the overwhelm is I hear from almost every single person who calls me for help. They say, I've tried to do this. I worked, hours and hours, and then I just ended up throwing everything back into the closet and throwing everything back into the room. And that's such a shame because all of those hours were lost and they don't see how they can start chipping away at it. It just seems so overwhelming. So one of the things when I work with people that we do is we organize ourselves to get organized. There's actually like a before that diving into the actual project. And the purpose of that is so that we can continually work, whether someone wants to work in between our sessions, and sometimes people do, and sometimes people don't. You are already set up with different zones in whatever room you're working on so that you can pick it up, so you can go in for 15 minutes and you can go through a drawer and you have not lost that time. Instead of all of those hours being lost, you are adding up positive organizing hours towards your end goal.
Yes.
And that's something that people just, unfortunately, divorce or not, they don't really see how to do it. But with divorce, I find, as you mentioned, there's, so many other things. You've got your lawyer, you've got your financial person. Oftentimes you've got, hopefully, a mental health, professional in there helping you. And there are demands from those people too. But like you said, it is true that people sort of go to the stuff last. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of such circumstances where people post-divorce, they've said, okay, my ex moved out and took these 20 things with them. I'm going to go run out and, replace those 20 things. And they don't actually need to do that. And so that's another thing that I do with people, is to sort of sit down with them and have a fresh pair of eyes and say, okay, what do you really need to spend the money to replace these things that your ex took? Or can we do some rearranging? And what do you want your house to look like? People now have the opportunity to create a space that reflects their life, their taste, their vision for what their home wants to look like. And it doesn't necessarily have to be replacing, eye for an eye, what was taken.
Mm. It's also good to make changes and start a new, sort of a symbolic ritual almost, I want to say, to just change it up and put a new stamp on it, your own stamp on it.
Yeah. And I often, when people say, I just have no idea where to start, my whole house needs to be done. I often, especially with divorce, I suggest the bedroom, because I think that you need a calm oasis for you to retreat to, and starting in the bedroom, where a lot of people have had very difficult private conversations leading up to divorce in the bedroom. And sometimes there can be a lot of difficult memories. And so changing up the aesthetic of the bedroom, which oftentimes obviously means going through the stuff that's been thrown in closets, on the floor, in drawers, etc., that's the first place to start. And like you said, it's a fresh start. It's a clean slate. I love the positive divorce movement. This is an opportunity. Yes, of course, it's sad. It's the ending of a marriage, and nobody gets married wanting to get divorced. But when you're facing divorce, I really encourage people to take this as an opportunity for a fresh start, a clean slate. Do it the way you want to do it. And, and it's happening anyway. So try to embrace it as much as you can. And I know that sometimes that sounds really hard in the beginning, but with time, it certainly gets easier. Yeah.
I remember I redid my bedroom, and I was nowhere near ready for a new relationship or anything of the kind. But I redressed it, changed the colors, and put a few special things in there for myself. And I did it consciously with the intention of creating a new love nest for myself. And that's what I called it after that. And it was a really healing exercise for me, just to bring closure to what was and relationship that was, and opening myself up with a new space for what might come in the future. And
I love that. Yeah. And so much of what I hear from people, especially women, is that they really don't know who they are. They get lost in the marriage and with the identity of the wife and the mother. And divorce is an opportunity for them to get to know who they are, get to know what they like, what are their preferences, what are their values. And that can often start with, what does your space look like?
Mm. So tell me something. How do you deal with different personalities? Because some people are naturally more ordered and organized, and some people are really by nature disorganized and even untidy.
Sure.
How do you deal with the different kinds of people?
Well, it's pretty easy to tell. And it's funny, I do offer like a 30-minute consultation type of call, just to complimentary, just to sort of see and to speak to somebody. But every person that I've ever spoken to knows that they need the help when they're calling. It's they've tried to do it themselves. And it just hasn't worked, whether or not they're organized in general or not, in pre-divorce or not. And I would say that there are people who, I put the foundation of what I teach and the method that I teach out there. And I see pretty early on whether there are some people who are going to catch on, and they just need that hand holding and that instruction, and say, okay, do this, do that, here, we're going to do this, and let's go through it. And especially working virtually so much, recently, it's been interesting because I haven't had the opportunity to be in the room physically with somebody, and people have had to be a little bit more independent in their organizing. And I think that's actually been a good thing. So there are a lot of people who just need the guidance. They also just need the accountability of, here's the time that I've put aside to work on my organizing, and I'm going to show up to it. Left to their own devices, that I like to liken this to exercise. It's like, I'm a personal trainer for your stuff. Some people will say, oh, I'm going to exercise, and then they put it off, they put it off, they put it off. But if you're working with a personal trainer and you've paid them and you've blocked off the time, you're going to show up for that. So it's yeah, right. So it's kind of a similar situation. And then there are the people, like you said, who are just disorganized and untidy. And this has been a lifelong issue. And now they're faced with divorce, and it's just even more overwhelming. And so that, then people need more handholding. If we're going through a drawer, for example, people may need to sit down. And in extreme cases, I will have someone sit down and just look at two things at a time or one thing at a time, ask them specific questions, and sort of put a time limit on it. And there's momentum that gets built, whether you're someone who is more challenged in the organizing or someone who just needs to, like, that push and that accountability. There's momentum that builds, and they see, okay, we're doing this, and this is what I need to do next. And so it's a feeling that kind of moves forward, but so hard to do it on your own oftentimes.
Yes, I imagine there are a bunch of very valuable life skills that you're learning in the process of doing this with your guidance. I can just see how one would learn to order your mind and yourself, and also to reach decisions, because that's also something that, being in a separation or a divorce situation, is more difficult. And also for some personalities, it's more difficult. But I can see how, having to sort things out and having to declutter and create some order, you have to make certain decisions, whether it is, like you said, just looking at two things and deciding whether you're going to keep either one of them or, discard everything.
Absolutely. And your brain is much more foggy when you're going through divorce. So this can become more difficult. And also, you have the items that are related specifically to your marriage, yes, that are questions, pictures, albums. I was working recently with somebody who was married to a man from another country, and there were all kinds of ceremonial things that were stored from her wedding and from trips to that country. And she just said, you know what, this is just not meaningful to me anymore. But I think before we sat down and really started to talk it through a little bit, she said, oh no, I can't get rid of those things. And, once you sort of open up and ask yourself some difficult questions, like, well, what am I holding on to? People hold on to things because they're holding on to the memories. They're holding on to the hope of what they represent. It's not actually about, the thing itself. So yeah, that can be, with divorce, there are many different angles. And that's why I saw that I could sort of tap into those angles and be a little more sensitive, and a little more aware as we're moving, working with people who are going through or who are divorced with these specific items, the engagement ring, the dress, all of those things. And people sometimes are not ready to get rid of them. They don't know. Sometimes people are like, get it the heck out of my house, but yeah. And I really tend to be more, I'm more sensitive and I'm more gentle, but I also suggest to people who may not be ready to go through certain things to not just say no and just leave it, to sort of, I'm very big with the scheduling and the maintenance. And so I suggest to people, like, okay, schedule this and whatever kind of scheduling, you use. In 6 months from now, let's go, here's a box of stuff you could not decide on. Let's label it, let's put it here, and schedule it in for 6 months from now, rather 6 months from when you're working on it, that you're going to go back and you're going to reopen it, because you're going to feel so much different. You're going to be in a much different place in your life and in your divorce healing. And you may feel differently at that point,
Yes. I think that's a very good idea because myself personally, I one day in a fit of rage took all my wedding photographs and I burnt them. I tore them to pieces and I burnt them out of anger and disappointment. And I'm so sorry. I've regretted it so many times since then that I actually wrote an article that's on my website, 12 reasons why, it's called Don't Burn Your Photographs, Don't Burn Your Wedding Photographs, with some reasons why you shouldn't do it. Because I realized the value of it, and had I stacked it away in a box somewhere and given myself some time to process what was going on, I'm sure I would have come to my senses and realized the importance thereof for my own memories and for my children and for the family and everything, and they're gone. I have a few that I've managed to get together here and there. So yes, that's a very good idea. If you're not too sure, or maybe just if you have an emotional charge about it, instead of just throwing it away, put it away for a while and revisit it.
Right, exactly. So you're a perfect example of why you should put it in a box.
I should have had you then.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. I wonder if people's reaction would be, I'd rather do it myself. How easy is it for people to, well, actually I should ask, do they hand it over to you, or do they end up doing it themselves with your guidance and your training and your support?
Well, we end up doing it together. I mean, I really encourage people to work with me. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, to do just an organizing job where you're editing, right? Where you're going through, I mean, I can't go through people's stuff for them. If I'm doing if I'm doing a job where I'm setting up a new apartment for a parent who's moved out, and, is working full time, doesn't have the time or the interest to get all of their things ready and their home stocked and ready, especially for kids, then I don't need to, they can just hand it off to me. But when we're editing, you can't really hand it off to me. I can't make those decisions for people. Yeah.
And then I was also wondering, when you have a situation where you have 50-50 shared parenting like yourself, can you help people? Because I'm thinking, if you're actually not just setting up one new house, you can actually very cleverly divide the stuff that's in the house to create a kind of a homely, maybe a known environment in both houses for the children. So would you then look at everything that's there and divide it so that everybody has something that's familiar and that's maybe part of the family for a while?
I love how you put that. And what I really encourage people who are setting up new homes to do is to involve the children, which sometimes people are like, what do you mean? I just, they are already upset. And as you know, I'm sure, people are very, very worried and guilty about their marriages breaking up and how that's going to affect their children. And while that's certainly an understandable emotion to have, the reality is that the divorce is happening and the kids are going to go through the divorce, and to sugarcoat it and to pretend like it's not happening does not work for anybody. It really isn't in the best interest of anybody, certainly not the children. So to have some difficult conversations, or what may be perceived as difficult conversations, but oftentimes end up not being difficult. They end up being situations I've seen where the kids feel relieved that they're being included and thought of. I mean, kids want to be seen and heard and remembered in these situations. They don't want to show up one day to mom or dad's new house and it's completely unrecognizable, like you're saying, so oftentimes I will say, okay, what do you want to bring with you? Like you're saying, pick some things that you want to bring with you, that you want to put in this new space. But also, if you're, able to choose a paint color, sheets, wall decorations, if the kids are able to be involved in creating their own space, they're going to show up at the parent's house, new home, and feel much better and feel more ownership and adapt to that new space much quicker than if it just sort of poof, like magically appears for them, and that's a big issue that I've seen a lot, where kids don't And I mean, I've seen it with my own kids too. Actually, my ex-husband just moved to a new apartment, and my kids were not so excited about the new apartment because it's the second place that he's lived since we're divorced. And they actually said to me, we were talking about it, and they said, we got adjusted to the other place, and now it's this new place. And they're like not really into it, and so kids really need to have that opportunity to get adjusted. And parents, I think that the parent who moves out of the home has a lot of anxiety often about the child not being comfortable. They feel like they're at a disadvantage. They're not in the marital home that the children may have been used to growing up in. And so they feel like it's almost a competition.
Yes.
It's almost a contest. And they feel a lot of anxiety over, oh my gosh, are they going to be comfortable here? Are they going to want to spend the weekend or the night? And so by involving the children in the decoration and in bringing things, like you said, some of the things that are more comforting or familiar from the marital home, I think that's a fabulous idea. It's kind of a conglomeration.
Yes, I like what you're saying also, because the other thing that comes to mind is that when the divorce is happening, for children, it often seems that everything is beyond their control. There's this whole grown-up thing happening that they cannot do anything about. They have to accept it. So to give them some autonomy in terms of what their rooms look like, or involvement, as long as it's age appropriate, is a good way to keep them busy, to get them to adjust to the thought of the changes that are going to happen. And also, I have found that it's a golden opportunity to have conversations with your children about how the status quo is going to change, what their living arrangements are going to be like, and everything that goes around that. It helps the process to go along more smoothly.
Yeah. And what you said about just a conversation. I mean, sometimes parents are afraid to just have any conversations with their kids at all. They just want to pretend like everything is normal, even though it's really not. And so having a conversation about anything, about having a conversation about paint is an open, an opening a door to having a conversation about something that's maybe a little more difficult at a time down the road. It's showing the children that they've got their parents' ear, they've got their parents' attention, they're thinking about them, they're considering what, their feelings, and that's all good for everybody.
Yes, yeah, wonderful. This is so interesting. I'm so grateful that we're having this chat, Michelle. It's wonderful. So I wanted to ask you, you did mention working virtually a bit earlier. Tell us, how do you work? Because you're in the States, we're in South Africa, and my platform is actually globally. So I have people from all over the world involved. And I believe people can enlist you and get your help virtually, online.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually, I mean, before the pandemic, I would never have thought of working virtually. It was not necessary, and I wouldn't have thought that it would translate, but it happens to have translated really well. And as I mentioned before, I like that it's giving the people, not a choice. When I'm in the room with them, they can kind of like put some things off on me and sort of sit there. But I find that it's really beneficial to them because they're up and they're moving around and they're, they're taking on more of a responsible role. I'm there as a guide if they get stuck, but it's really empowering to show people I can be here physically and you can be there, and you're doing this yourself. I'm helping you a little bit, but you're really doing this. Mm-hmm. So that's really empowering. And of course, going through divorce, so many people's self-esteem, especially women, is really shot. Confidence is shot. Mm-hmm. And so to give them an opportunity to really affect some change in their environment is I think really super positive. So yeah, I do work virtually one-on-one. I do offer sessions, 3 and 6 session packages. And I also have started in the last few months doing groups. Yes. So yeah, so the groups are each month we meet once a week, and I don't know, I'm thinking time wise. I mean, if I had a group from one time zone that would be interested in doing it, I mean, I could put it together, but right now we do 12 p.m. Eastern time, which I guess would be, I mean, in London, it would be 6 p.m., I believe, which is not horrible. We work Right now it's just with women, and we're doing up to 6 women together, and we're all working on one room. We've done bedrooms, we've done kitchen right before Thanksgiving, and I'm skipping December because everyone's super busy. And I'm also encouraging people, like, this is really not the time to start organizing. This is the time you need to be focused on self-care, and just getting through this time. And then January is a very big, okay, everything has settled and let's start organizing. So in January, we're going to be doing home offices, because oftentimes that's a place, a room that gets a lot of stuff dumped in, and then it's not functional for what it was intended for in the first place. So we do that once a week. It's 4 Wednesdays that we're doing that. And it's really helpful because women are often isolating themselves after divorce. And this gives you an opportunity to show up and to see other people, on the screen, but to see other people who are going through exactly what you're going through. Oftentimes situations and conversations come up with other people that pertain to you,
Yes.
and that you might not have thought of before. So it's it's a great chance to share information and work on a project that you want to get done all at the same time. So I love the groups. They're great.
It's a great concept. I love that as well. Michelle, tell me, what does it feel like to get up so close and personal with people, to get into their bedrooms and, you actually have a look at and you see everything and you learn everything about them. You go through their drawers. What does that feel like? What dynamic develops? What kind of relationship develops between you and the person that you help with this?
That's such an interesting question that I don't think anybody's ever asked me before. So I appreciate that. It's really, it's somewhat like, a therapist on the outside in a lot of ways, because our things really reflect what's going on in our lives. And people oftentimes feel there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of embarrassment over things that people have, not actual things, but how disorganized they are, or how many things they have, or how dysfunctional, their systems may have gotten. And so, I really view my position or my part to sort of, not console them, but to reassure them that this is normal and this is what happens when life gets busy, and this is not your priority, understandably, and it's okay. And we fix it, and people, really, there's a lot of sharing that you would be surprised of, like you're saying, it's a very intimate experience, even via Zoom. It can be a really intimate conversation that comes up where people are sharing, and especially around divorce. And that's why, I felt like there was a need for an organizer who had been through it themselves. Oftentimes there's extra shame. So there's already shame in being disorganized, but there's that additional shame and embarrassment about the divorce itself. And hopefully that's changing. But I think people feel less judged by someone who's, been there, done that, lived through it, come out the other side. And I think that there's a lot of hope also, so I can give people that hope. Like, this is maybe where you are right now, but you're not going to be here forever, both with your physical stuff as well as what's going on in your head and some difficult feelings.
Yes, I agree with you. I find that myself also. It does help to say I've been there myself. I have experienced this. I have some understanding of what you are going through and what you're dealing with. But this has been a very interesting conversation. I just have one more question for you. How do you support people after the initial sorting out to maintain that, to sustain that?
Right. So that's my favorite part, actually, because it's teaching people, like you mentioned before, some life skills. And I also just want to quickly mention with that, I also try to, if kids are around, I encourage people to share with their kids what they're doing, because it allows kids to say, like, to see that getting help is okay. And that, what, mommy and daddy can't do everything perfectly. They don't have every skill set, and it's okay in life to ask for help when we need it. And to also show them this is how, how we're setting things up. And when we do kids' rooms, to have the kids participate. It's your room. How is it going to work best for you? How do you want your stuff organized in your room? And I try to bring the kids in as often as I can. And so as far as sustaining and maintaining, I encourage people to schedule in a weekly maintenance. And in the beginning, I say, you know what, put aside 20 minutes. And whether it's 20 minutes on the weekend, 5 minutes at the end of the day, to just put everything back. Yes. Normally people want to do it on the weekend. So I say, fine, put aside 20, 30 minutes, get everyone together. If you can, that's ideal. Put on some music and just put, you're just putting stuff back where it was because you've already got those systems set up. It's easy to put stuff back in. You've got places to put things that need to be repaired. You've got stuff that needs to be donated. You've got zones in your home now where there's not all this stuff that keeps circulating around and you keep seeing it over and over again. It's directed, to where it needs to be. And so it's really important to take that time to maintain it. And if for some reason you can't keep that scheduled maintenance appointment, I tell people, don't just blow it off, reschedule that time. If you need to do it during the week or break it up, reschedule that time, because if you don't do that, you will find yourself back in the same position where you were in the first place. And oftentimes people will call me back in, 6 months, a year later and go, you know what, we need a little bit of help. And also sometimes we will set up systems and they find like, you know what, this wasn't working so great. What else can we put together? Yes. And we'll work on that as well. And it's evolving. And, as kids get older, also their organizational needs change, their clothing size, their toy size, their, all of that stuff changes. So there is always, an evolution of organizational needs with kids.
Yes. I know I said last question, but another question actually came up for me. Is there a good time or a best time in the divorce process to start organizing?
Well, look, before you get divorced is always best. I mean, if you're thinking, oftentimes people in a divorce, someone's moving, right? It's at least one person is moving, if not two. And oftentimes people are having to downsize and sell the marital home. And so if you know you're getting divorced, if you can start as early as possible, that's great. And that's actually another area where sometimes people, and that early on, I spoke to somebody who she was actually the seed that got planted in my head about, maybe going into the divorce niche for you is a good idea. She said that while she didn't even have children and she was going through a somewhat amicable divorce, she and her ex-husband, actually was her husband at the time, they hired a professional organizer to help them divide their stuff, because while everything else was fine and they could get through everything else, when they got down to the stuff and dividing it, they brought a lot of the emotions into that activity, and they just could not get through it themselves, and they needed a third party to help them. So that's ideal. I would say as soon as possible, because also I've seen so many people move and then they throw their stuff into storage, and then you're paying for a storage unit, which you don't need to be paying for. You want to organize and edit your stuff before you have to pay for storage, or before you're dumping it at your parents' house, at your best friend's house, and then it's like lost into oblivion. You don't even know what you have. So the sooner the better.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. Just for everybody who's listening, I will put Michelle's details in the comments below this video for you to reach her directly and make contact with her. And if you enjoyed this, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the Fair Divorce channel for more information of this nature. Michelle, in closing, what is the reason, or why should I get a personal or a professional organizer to help me instead of attempting it myself? What's the biggest benefit of working with somebody like you?
Well, I would say you can attempt it by yourself if you want. And if you can do that, that's great. But I would say the biggest benefit is actually, believe it or not, it's not about the stuff. It's not about, a beautiful color-coded closet or, decanted cereal in your cabinet. It's all about how you're going to feel once your home and your life is organized. And that's the gift of organization, in my opinion, is you being able to show up for your life, for yourself and for your kids. You know what you have, you don't have too much of it. You know when you need to shop for something. You're not storing a bunch of stuff that you don't have. You're saving yourself time, you're saving yourself money, but most importantly, you're feeling confident that when you leave the house in the morning, no matter where you're going, you know that you're going where you're supposed to be going with what you have, with what you need, and you're getting your kids, to the right place. And that promotes a good, happy feeling. That promotes you feeling confident and empowered, and increases your self-esteem. And that's why, getting the help that you need to go through this is, I believe, worth it for that reason.
Yes. And to add to that, there's been quite a lot of interesting research about the influence of your immediate environment on your state of mind, on your productivity, on your creativity, and all those sorts of things. So it makes sense to get organized.
100%. And for your kids too, because if your kids are coming home from school and they're walking into a disorganized, environment, it's just that's a reflection of your brain. Like you said, there's been a ton of research that your physical space mirrors your mental space. And so if you want your mental space to be better, the first place to start is truly your physical space.
That makes sense. Michelle, thank you so much. This has been very informative. And once again, I'm privileged to have this conversation. I appreciate your time and your energy to contribute.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I wish you well and hope to speak to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.